Have you ever come across the same brand in different locations and it's always felt a little bit different, different tone, different points of view, and you're not quite sure what they stand for and what they're all about? Now, this is a messaging problem and it's more common than you would think. In this episode, we're going to fix that by looking at your core messaging and positioning as part of your content strategy. Hello and welcome to the Content 10x podcast. I'm your host, Amy Woods, and I'm really excited to share with you today the fourth part in our content strategy series. Now, in the first part, we looked at what a content strategy is and why it's important. Then we looked at how to connect your content strategy to your business goals and to revenue. And then we looked at competitor analysis and how to figure out who your competitors are and look at differentiation. In today's episode, we're going to be digging into your core messaging and positioning, which is a really crucial component of your content strategy. When it comes to your messaging, consider this. You could have the best content engine in your industry, be publishing content in lots of different locations, and really be focusing on quality. But if it isn't memorable, then none of it sticks. So there's a real difference between creating content that is going to consistently help you be remembered versus creating content that is just filling a feed. But before jumping into the main content, just to mention our B2B content operations benchmark. It's a free self-assessment, a series of quick-fire questions. It should take no more than 4 minutes of your time. You'll be asked about content strategy, you'll be asked about your tech setup and also your operations, your team capability and culture. And then from that, you'll get a personalized report to help you with your content operations and strategy. As I mentioned, it's completely free, shouldn't take too long, so maybe hit pause now and go ahead and take that at content10x.com/benchmark. So, what do we mean by messaging? Well, if I was to ask, say, 10 people in your organization what you are all about and why customers should choose to work with you, would they all broadly answer in the same way? And the answer is often no. So, there can be inconsistent messaging in your content, on your website, in sales conversations, and that's something that can really affect you. You need to be consistent with your messaging for people to truly understand you and what you are all about. And that's what messaging is. It's who you are, it's what your expertise is, it's your culture, it's your value proposition. And it's how you are different to your competitors. If you're really clear and consistent with your messaging, then people will remember you in all the right ways, exactly how you want to be remembered. And if you aren't, then they simply won't. And your messaging, it has to connect with your audience. If you're not connecting with your audience, then have a look and see what you are saying, what you maybe should be saying, and what maybe you shouldn't be saying as well. Can you have a great content strategy without clear messaging? I would argue that that would be very, very challenging because if you aren't being clear and consistent with who you are and what you're all about, then that inconsistency and that scattergun approach is going to really affect people in terms of whether they remember you. And when they have a problem that you provide the solution for, if it's not really clear that you provide that solution because they're hazy in terms of who you are and what you're all about, even if they know who you are, then all your content is not going to have worked in the way that you would hope it would. So I really think that messaging is very important, and you are going to feel a negative impact if your content strategy hasn't nailed down your messaging and your positioning. Is messaging just a marketing thing? No, it isn't. Now, messaging is about internal alignment. You want your messaging to be clear, and then everybody is going to be singing from the same hymn sheet. So, yes, that would be for marketing, but also leadership and sales and product. Everybody has to be clear on the messaging. Now, usually you would say that messaging is owned by marketing, but as I said, everybody needs to be aware of it and aligned. So, different parts of your organization need to be clear and they need to feed into the messaging as well. So, I've talked about the importance of a messaging framework. What should be the components that go in that messaging framework? And there's quite a few different things to consider. So, firstly, your content topics. There are so many things that you could talk about, but you need to decide what you should talk about. So, what expertise do you want to portray in your industry? What do you want to hone in on? And what do you want to talk about from a topic perspective? Then there's how you talk about it. So, you want to also nail down your tone of voice, your brand tone, and how you come across. Do you want to come across as conversational, not taking yourself too seriously? Do you want to be more formal? What is your tone? What are your company values? And not just what do you talk about, but how do you talk about that? And that comes through in your tone of voice. So you'd expect that to be part of your messaging framework as well. Then there's your differentiation as well. Now, I talked about the competitor analysis in the last episode in this content strategy series. Competitor analysis being about how are you going to be different from your competitors? And that differentiation should also be a part of your messaging framework. Then consider your category narrative. So, what is the big idea that you stand for within your category? And then also there is your value proposition. So, why should somebody choose to work with you or buy from you? What is your value proposition? And that should be really clear in your messaging framework. And again, this comes to your competitor analysis and looking at differentiation and making sure that you're really clear in terms of the value that you add to your audience and your customers. So, if they're the components that go into your messaging framework, how do you figure all of this out? Now, a lot of it is about conversation with people who are going to be able to feed into this. So, that would be your leadership, your product team, your sales team. I already mentioned that messaging is often owned by marketing, but it needs to be in internal alignment with loads of different parts of your organization, with everybody within your organization. So you need to be having those conversations and figuring out a bit more about your audience, about their pain points, and about the solution that you provide. And I mentioned this already, but also your culture. How do you want to come across? That needs to be decided internally in terms of the messaging and your positioning. What is your culture? What is the vibe that you want to be giving out in your content and your messaging? And also, where do you sit within your category as well? Do you want to be a category leader? Are you a niche specialist within your category? Are you the contrarian voice within your category? All of this forms part of deciding on that core messaging and positioning. And I'll loop back as well to your competitor analysis. I've mentioned this a few times, but how are you different to your competitors? What annoys you about your competitors? That's a really good way of looking at how you're different, not just by looking at what you stand for and the similarities, but what annoys you about your competitors, because that can really help you to frame how you want to come across. So, when you have defined your core messaging, what next? What do you need to do with this? Well, you need to make sure that it's infused in your content. So, it needs to be in your blog posts and your other website content, in your podcast if you have one, in your video, in your sales materials, in your other marketing materials, how you show up on social media platforms, in your core channels. All of that content needs to be infused by this messaging framework, and consistency is then key. So, if you are consistently applying this messaging and always making sure that you are aligning with the messaging framework, then consistency will build authority and help you become a leader in what you want to be known for. And I would also point out that opinionated content often plays a really big role in building that authority as well. As I mentioned earlier, what is your one big idea in your category? What do you stand for? Are you a contrarian voice in your category? Now, I'm not saying that you should go and create content that is like divisive and just there to start, causing debates online or anything like that. But do make sure that you're bold and that you stand for something so your messaging is really clear and stands out. Because at the moment, with so much AI content out there, standing out and differentiation is really crucial. So don't hold back from being opinionated and building that into your messaging framework. And in terms of how you use your messaging on a daily basis, it just has to be a part of your processes. You have to keep asking that question: have we aligned this with our messaging framework? And you have to hold other people accountable to that as well. So in marketing, you're going to have to be the messaging police and make sure that you are policing the content that you're not responsible for, and sales, product, leadership, etc., that you're always aligning with messaging so that you can be really consistent and just always answer that question, does this align with our messaging framework? And if you use AI tools to help you with content, then it can be really useful to embed your messaging and your key positioning into these AI tools. So they often have global settings that you can input this kind of information into. So it would be fantastic to make sure that you input all of that into your AI. So if it is supporting you with creating content or even ideation, it's always going to be bearing in mind your messaging and positioning framework. So the next question would be, how do you know if your messaging is working? And I think there are some really clear signals that can help you with this. Now, first of all, when your audience and your prospects and customers come to you and start repeating your ideas and what you stand for and the things that you've been saying that are core to your messaging framework, when they start repeating that back to you, that's a great sign that your messaging is working. Quite often, you feel like customers start referring to when you talk about, or I know that your position on this is, well, great, messaging is obviously doing its job. Of course, on certain platforms with your content, you can also look at engagement rates as well. So when you're really leaning into your messaging, are you starting to see an increase in engagement and more people commenting and liking and sharing your content? That would show that they are resonating with it. And hopefully, that is a signal that your messaging framework is on point for your audience. Can also speak to the sales teams as well and look at your inbound leads. Do they seem exactly the right people that you're trying to attract? And then sales may also mention to you that when they're on sales calls, they're repeating back exactly what you would hope them to be saying in understanding who you are and what you do. And they're using your language as well. So look at your inbound leads, look at who they are, and look at what they're saying and their behaviors. And of course, on the flip side, are you attracting the wrong audience too? So, are the wrong leads coming through and inquiries that don't quite make sense or aren't really aligned with who you're trying to attract? That would also then be a sign that perhaps there's a little bit of a misalignment with your messaging framework. And you can really look at those people and those conversations that you're having and try and work out what you might need to change in your messaging framework to try and get back on track to attracting the audience that you want and bringing in the right kind of leads. So, I guess what I'm saying here is that there is the quantitative feedback. You can look at those engagement rates and things like that, and the qualitative feedback as well. And don't underestimate the qualitative feedback. So, speaking to your leadership team when they're out meeting customers and at events and things like that, speaking to sales teams as well, and just understanding what they're saying about the people that are engaging with the company and coming in and having sales calls, etc. And just making sure that you're always checking that there seems really good alignment with your messaging and who you want to be in the world, what you want to be known for, and what people are coming in and expecting you to be all about. And your messaging framework, it's not going to be set in stone. You're going to want to be reviewing it and assessing it over time. And I think there are certain signals that may say to you that maybe this is the time to look at your messaging framework. So, firstly, that may just be, as we just discussed, that if the wrong kind of leads and the wrong kind of people engaging with your content seems to be becoming quite a thing and it's quite repeatable, that would be a signal to go back and look at your messaging framework. So, looking at a shift in your audience, then there may just be a change in your industry, a change in your competitor landscape. Perhaps a competitor has come in and they've started to have very similar messaging to you, and you're both starting to sound very samey. Maybe they're even copying you, who knows? A response to that would be to look at your messaging and look at how you can make some changes and start to really differentiate again from this key competitor or for new entrants into your industry as well. So sometimes a change in your competitor or industry landscape can trigger a look at your messaging framework. And third, that could be an internal change as well. So maybe you have just grown as a business and evolved in some way, and so your messaging needs to change. Maybe you've launched a new product, or perhaps there's been a shift in leadership and they have different views on what the messaging should be of the company, or a rebrand as well. So internal changes can spark and need to look at your messaging framework as well. Now, I would say that when you are looking to make some changes to your messaging and your positioning, don't do a really hard pivot. I would say look to gradually evolve and change things, and then be looking at measurement and signals to see if the evolution of your messaging is going in the right direction for you. And you want to make sure that you get internal buy in for any changes. Again, I mentioned earlier that marketing usually own messaging and positioning, but it really is something that everybody in the company needs to be aligned with. So, in the same way that you would work with key stakeholders to define messaging to begin with, as you start to evolve and change, just make sure that you do bring everyone on that journey with you. Okay, so I hope you found this really useful. As a reminder, this is the fourth part of our content strategy series. In part one, we looked at what a content strategy is and why it's important. And then we looked at connecting your content strategy to your business goals. Then we moved on to look at competitor analysis and differentiation. And in this episode, that I hope you found useful, it's all been about your core messaging and positioning. You can go to the show notes to get links for all of the past episodes. And in the next episode in this series, we're going to be looking at the content channels and formats as well. So, where should you be creating content for, and what types of content should you be publishing as well? So, that's coming up in the next part of the strategy series. And finally, before we finish up, I mentioned it earlier, but I'll mention it again. Don't hesitate to go and take our B2B content operations benchmark assessment. It takes no more than 4 minutes of your time. It's a series of quick fire questions. It's free. It's a self assessment. You'll answer questions on content strategy, tech, operations, team, capability, and then you'll get a customized report personalized to you. And it'll provide actionable advice, insights, and links to really useful resources for where you're currently at. So just head to content10x.com/benchmark to go and take that assessment. And finally, if you'd like some help with your content marketing, whether that's with your content strategy, content creation, building a content repurposing engine, we can help. Just head to content10x.com/inquiry, and we'd love to have a call with you and find out what you're all about and what you'd like to achieve with your content. Okay, all that's left to say is thank you so much for joining me in this episode, and I'll catch you in the next one.